I want to tell you what a one-way ticket feels like when you buy it at 68 years old with no plan and no return date and nobody waiting for you on either end. It feels like the most irresponsible thing you've ever done, and the most honest. My name is Robert. I'm 79 now, and I want to tell you about the 2 years between when my wife died and when I got on that plane, because those 2 years are the part nobody talks about. Everyone talks about grief like it has a shape, like it moves through stages and arrives somewhere. What nobody tells you is that for some people, grief doesn't move at all. It just sits, heavy and permanent and quiet, the way a piece of furniture sits in a room. You walk around it every day. You stop seeing it. And then one morning, you wake up and realize you've been walking around it for 2 years, and the room has gotten smaller and smaller, and you can barely move anymore. That was me at 68, 2 years after Margaret died, living in the same house, sleeping on the same side of the bed, eating dinner at 5:30 because that's when we always ate dinner, and I didn't know how to want to eat at a different time. My son called every Sunday. My daughter visited once a month. I went to the hardware store on Saturdays because I needed something to do that required leaving the house. That was my life, and I had accepted it. That's the part that frightens me now when I think back on it. Not that I was unhappy, but that I had accepted it so completely. I had decided, without ever deciding out loud, that the life I'd had with Margaret was the real life, and everything after was just time to get through. I don't know exactly what changed. I wish I could tell you there was a dramatic moment, a conversation that shook me, a book I read, a sign of some kind. There wasn't. What there was a Tuesday morning in February when I was cleaning out Margaret's side of the closet 2 years late because I hadn't been able to do it before, and I found in the pocket of a coat she hadn't worn in years a folded piece of paper. It was a list. Margaret's handwriting, which was very small and very neat. The handwriting of a woman who was organized in a way I never was and never will be. The list had 8 things on it: places, Sintra, Portugal, the Douro Valley, the Alentejo Coast, Lisbon in the rain, the Azores, a restaurant in Porto, whose name I couldn't read because it was smudged, Evora, and at the bottom, underlined twice, the whole country. I want to see the whole country. I stood in that closet for a long time, holding that piece of paper. I don't know how long enough that my knees started to ache from standing on the hard floor. Margaret had never mentioned Portugal. Not once in 43 years of marriage had she said, "I want to go to Portugal." She had a whole country's worth of wanting inside her, and she never said it out loud. And then she died at 66 of a heart attack on a Wednesday morning in our kitchen, and the wanting went with her, except it didn't. It was in her coat pocket. It was on that piece of paper. It was now in my hands. I put the paper in my wallet. I don't know why. I wasn't thinking clearly enough to have a reason. I just knew I didn't want to put it down. I carried it for 3 weeks, took it out sometimes, and looked at it. Sintra, Portugal, Lisbon in the rain, the whole country. I want to see the whole country. On a Saturday morning in March, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I looked up flights from Charlotte to Lisbon. I looked at hotels. I looked at the Douro Valley on Google Maps and zoomed in until I could see the terraced hillsides and the river running through them. I looked at Sintra and its palaces on hilltops above the Atlantic. And then I opened a new tab and I bought a one-way ticket. Not a round trip. One way. I want to be clear about this because it matters. A round trip is a vacation. A round trip has an end date baked in. A round trip says, I am going and then I am coming back, and both of those things are already decided. A one-way ticket says, I am going. What happens after that? I don't know yet. A one-way ticket is not irresponsible when you're 68 years old and retired, and your house will be there when you get back, whether you stay 2 weeks or 2 months. A one-way ticket at that point in my life was the only honest way to go, because if I bought a round trip, I would have come back on the date it said, whether or not I was ready. And I didn't want to make that decision in advance. I wanted to let Portugal decide. I told my son first. Daniel is practical, like his mother. He asked immediately how long I was planning to stay. I said I didn't know. There was a silence on the phone that I recognized. It was the silence of a person who has something to say and is deciding whether to say it. Then he said, "Dad, is everything okay?" And I said, "No, but I think it might be." My daughter Karen cried, not from worry. Karen understood immediately what this was about in a way that Daniel needed more time to reach. She said, "You found something of Mom's, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I told her about the list. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Go. Go and see it for her." And I said, "I was going for me too." And she said, "I know. That's why I want you to go." I left on a Thursday in April. I packed one bag. By that point, I had learned from the Slovenia trip 2 years before that one bag is all you need, and everything else is just weight you carry for no reason. I had Margaret's list in my wallet, the original, folded the same way she had folded it. I had travel insurance. I had my medications in 2 separate places. I had Daniel's number and Karen's number and a WhatsApp message ready to send when I landed. The flight from Charlotte to Lisbon is about 8 hours with a connection. I slept for maybe 2 of them. For the rest, I sat with the window shade up, watching the Atlantic pass underneath, which from that height is just an endless gray nothing that goes on longer than feels possible. I thought about Margaret the whole flight, not the last months. I had thought about those enough. I thought about her at 32, when we were young and broke and had just moved into the first house we owned, and she made a list of everything we needed to fix and ranked them by importance, and then we did them in order, one by one, over 3 years until the house was right. That was Margaret. The list in the coat pocket was Margaret. The whole country, underlined twice, was Margaret. I landed in Lisbon at 6 in the morning, local time. The airport was quiet at that hour, just arriving passengers and the people who meet them. Nobody was meeting me. I took a taxi to the hotel, a small place in the Alfama neighborhood that I had booked for 4 nights as a starting point, with no plans after that. The taxi driver's name was Paulo. He spoke enough English to ask where I was from and whether this was my first time in Portugal. And when I said yes, he said, without any particular emphasis, as if it were simply a fact, "You will not want to leave." I thought he was just saying something pleasant. He was not just saying something pleasant. Lisbon in April is warm, but not hot. The light is different from anything I had seen before. It has a quality I don't have the right word for. Something between gold and white. The kind of light that makes everything look slightly more real than it actually is. Or maybe exactly as real as it actually is, and I just hadn't been paying attention. The city is built on 7 hills, and nothing is flat, and the streets in Alfama are so narrow and steep that sometimes 2 people can barely pass each other, and the tiles on the buildings are blue and white, and some of them are hundreds of years old, and they're just there, on the sides of buildings. Like it's the most ordinary thing in the world to live, surrounded by centuries of hand-painted ceramic. I dropped my bag at the hotel and went walking. No map, no plan, just out the door and into the city. I walked for 3 hours. I got lost twice and found my way back by walking toward the river, which you can always see from the hills if you get high enough. I sat at a small cafe and had a coffee and a pastry, a pastel de nata, the custard tarts that are everywhere in Lisbon, and watched the street. An old man with a small dog, a woman hanging laundry from a window 4 floors up, 2 boys on scooters nearly colliding at a corner, a cat. There are cats everywhere in Alfama, just living there, belonging to no one and everyone. I sat at that cafe for an hour and a half. I had nowhere to be. That was the first time since Margaret died that I had sat somewhere with nowhere to be and not felt the sitting as a kind of failure. At home, nowhere to be felt like a verdict. Here, it felt like the whole point. I stayed in Lisbon for 8 days, not the 4 I had booked. I called the hotel and asked if I could extend, and the woman at the desk said, of course, as if extending was the natural thing to do, as if leaving after 4 days would have been the strange choice. I walked every day. I went to Sintra on the train, 40 minutes from Lisbon, the palaces exactly as ridiculous and beautiful as they looked in photographs, sitting on hilltops above pine forests above the Atlantic, built by kings who apparently could not build anything without making it look like a fever dream. I stood at the westernmost point of continental Europe, a place called Cabo da Roca, where the land just ends and the ocean begins, and the wind was so strong I had to lean into it, and I thought, Margaret would have stood here and cried, not from sadness, from the sheer fact of it, from the ocean just being that large and that present and that indifferent. I didn't cry, I just stood there. And then I went and found somewhere to eat. From Lisbon, I took a train north to Porto. Porto is a different city. Darker stone, steeper hills, the Douro River running through it deep and brown. The port wine lodges are on the south bank of the river, facing the city. and in the evenings the light on the river turns the color of the wine inside the barrels, and you can sit at a table above it and drink a glass and watch the light change and feel, very specifically, that you are somewhere real. I spent 4 days in Porto. I found the restaurant from Margaret's list. The name had been smudged, but I had looked at it in the light from different angles and worked out what I thought it said. And I found a restaurant with that name on a street near the river. I don't know if it was the right one. I couldn't ask her. I sat at a table by the window and ordered the fish and the wine and ate slowly, and when I was done, I took a photograph of the table and the window and the street outside and sent it to Karen with no message. She sent back 3 words. I love you. I went to the Douro Valley. I had not planned to. It wasn't on my route. But a man at the hotel in Porto said if I hadn't seen the valley, I hadn't seen Portugal. And he told me to take the train that follows the river east into the wine country. I took the train. The valley is terraced vineyards cut into hillsides so steep they seem almost vertical, dropping down to the river, row after row after row of them going back as far as you can see. The train follows the river for hours, and you sit there watching it change. And the whole time, you feel the specific feeling of being somewhere that has been worked and tended and cared for by people for centuries. Someone planted those vines. Someone built those terraces. Generation after generation of hands in that soil. I thought about Margaret's hands. She grew tomatoes in the backyard every summer. Her hands were always dirty from May to September. I stayed in the valley for 3 days at a small place that was half farmhouse, half hotel, run by a couple about my age who had left Lisbon 20 years earlier to make wine. They had 3 dogs and chickens and a table outside, under a pergola, where they served dinner every evening to whoever was staying. There were 6 of us that first night. Me, a young couple from Germany, a woman traveling alone from Australia, and 2 friends from France who seemed to know each other in the way that only people who have been friends for 40 years know each other. We ate for 3 hours. We drank wine that came from the hillside, visible from the table. I understood maybe half of what was said because half of it was in languages I don't speak. It didn't matter. I was at a table with people, in the dark, with food and wine and the sound of the river somewhere below us in the valley. I had not sat at a table like that since Margaret died. I want to stop here and say something clearly because I think it's the most important thing in this video, and I want to make sure you hear it. I did not go to Portugal to heal. I want to be very honest about that because there is a version of this story, the version that gets told in movies and memoirs, where the grieving person travels somewhere beautiful and the travel heals them, and they come back transformed, fixed, ready. That is not what happened. I was not healed by Portugal. Margaret was still dead when I landed in Lisbon, and she was still dead when I left. Grief is not a problem that travel solves. What Portugal did was something different, and in some ways more important. It reminded me that I was still a person who could be surprised, that I could sit at a cafe for an hour and a half and feel something other than the absence of her, that there were tables in the world where I could sit with strangers and eat for 3 hours and feel not happy exactly, but present, alive in the way that being in a new place and tasting new food and hearing a river in the dark makes you alive. Grief had made me small, not weak. I was not a weak man and I was not falling apart, but small. My world had contracted to the house and the hardware store, and Sunday phone calls and everything in between was just waiting. Portugal made the world large again. Not permanently, not all at once, but it made it large enough that I could see it was possible. That was enough. I stayed in Portugal for 6 weeks. I went to the Alentejo, the southern interior, dry and golden. Ancient villages on hilltops, cork oak forests. A silence so complete you can hear your own breathing. I went to Évora, the last item on Margaret's list. A city inside Roman walls with a Roman temple in the center that has been standing for 2,000 years. Just standing there in the middle of a small city, columns against the sky. I sat in the square in front of it and ate lunch and thought about 2,000 years and what it means that people built something and it is still there and they are not. And then I ordered dessert. I booked my flight home from Lisbon on a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks after I arrived. I could have stayed longer. I could have gone to the Azores. Margaret had the Azores on her list, and I didn't get there. I will get there. But I had been away long enough, and I missed my son's voice and my daughter's voice and even the hardware store a little. I called Daniel from the airport. He asked how it was, and I said it was very good. He asked if I was okay, and I said, I thought so, yes. He said, You sound different. I said I felt different. He said, different how? And I said I wasn't entirely sure yet, but that I thought the main thing was that I had remembered that I was still here, still in the world, still someone the world could surprise. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom would be glad. He was right. She would have been glad. She would also have had extensive opinions about every hotel I stayed in, and at least 4 complaints about the flights, and she would have told the story of finding her list in her own coat pocket for the rest of her life, with a level of dramatic emphasis that would have grown with each telling. I would have given a great deal to hear that, but I went instead, and it was the right thing. I want to tell you something before I finish. If you are watching this and you have lost someone, and the world has gotten small, and you are walking around the grief like furniture in a room you can barely move through anymore, I am not going to tell you that booking a flight fixes that. It doesn't. Nothing fixes that. But I am going to tell you this. There is a version of your life that is still possible. Not the life you had. That life is gone and you know it, and pretending otherwise helps nobody. But a life, a real one, with tables and food and light and rivers and the specific feeling of being somewhere new, where nobody knows your name or your story, and you can be whoever you are right now, not whoever you were. You don't need a one-way ticket. You don't need 6 weeks. You don't need Portugal. Though I will say, without any hesitation, that Portugal is extraordinary, and if you go, I promise you will not want to leave. You need a Tuesday morning and a reason that is entirely yours. A list in a coat pocket. A place on a map you've looked at too many times. A name of a city that keeps coming back to you in the quiet. Go toward that thing, whatever it is. Go toward it before you talk yourself out of it. I have Margaret's list in my wallet still. I've been to 5 of the 8 places on it now. 3 more to go. The Azores, the Smudge restaurant in Porto. I need to go back and find it properly this time. And the last one, the one she underlined twice. The whole country. I'm working on it.